Welcome, everyone. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves so that we can have, and in fact, I'm going to mute this so that you are not, there we go. Welcome. Let me try that again. This has been quite a few years in the making, following the incredible class I get to take with Professor Siegel. Hard to believe this was now over 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I have tried to bring some of the learning that I have acquired in her classroom to you, but nothing ever can compare to the real deal, right? And so I'm delighted that somehow it's been long enough that she's once again on sabbatical and once again not in Israel, but here. And so I'm delighted to welcome Michal to our Bima here at Temple Emmanuel. She's a scholar of Rabbinic Judaism. Her work focuses on aspects of Jewish-Christian interactions in the ancient world and compares early Christian and Rabbinic sources. She's a faculty member at the Goldstein-Goren Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and she was an elected member of the Israeli Yan Academy of Sciences. During this academic year, she's the Horace Goldsmith Visiting Professor in Judaic Studies at Yale University. Her first book is Early Christian Monastic Literature and the Babylonian Talmud in 2013. It feels like a long time ago. She's a winner of 2014 Manfred Lautenschlager Award. I hope I have only half murdered that. Her second book is Jewish-Christian Dialogue on Scripture in Late Antiquity, Heretic Narratives of the Babylonian Talmud, published by Cambridge University Press in 2019, and a finalist of the National Jewish Book Award in 2019 as well. All of these things are absolutely true and wonderful. Michal is an incredible scholar whose research has really put so many new things on the map for the world, but she's also an amazing teacher and a dear friend, and I'm so excited that she's finally here. And with that, I'm not going to speak anymore, and I will let you enjoy. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say thank you for the invitation, and I've heard about your community from Michael over the years, and it's really a pleasure to finally be here. What we'll do is a series of 3 lectures. So this is the first of 3. They're each individually, you can hear just one and not all 3, but it really tries to introduce to you what I do in my research and a little bit about what's happening in this field in Jewish studies, which I think is kind of exciting and new and groundbreaking, and it's an exciting time to be part of that research. And I want to share our conclusions and our thoughts and what we're doing in this field today. So we're going to start, and as part of this 3 series, what I'll do in the next few minutes, if I get this to change. Did it change? Nope. Why is this not working?
Try now.
Let's see. Yes. Okay. So a few words of setting us in time and space. So I'm talking about the Babylonian Talmud. This is my field of research, and this is what I do. In fact, you're sitting with 50% of female professors, female Talmud professors in Israel. There's only 2 of us. So I'm one of them. So this is my field of study. I look at the Babylonian Talmud. Now, the Babylonian Talmud, we'll talk about it in a second, but let's talk about where it was created and why what I'm teaching you now is new and exciting. So when we're looking at the ancient world, we're looking at 2 major empires, right? So we're looking at the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. So the Roman Empire, you can see the end, you see the word empire, that's at the end of it, right? So the land of Israel and Palestine, I don't know if I can, let's try to use this one and see if that works. Can you see my laser pointer? Yeah. So this is the land of Israel, right? So this is the most eastern province of the Roman Empire, right? So this is where Rome is, somewhere here, right? So, and we're talking about, this is the big Western Empire, right? And the land of Israel is an important part of it because it connects the Roman Empire basically to the Northern Africa, which was a very rich and important area, and this was the quickest land way to get to there. So this is why this part of the word always played a very important part. But this is the Roman Empire. A second empire that was happening at the time of late antiquity is the Persian Empire. And the time we're talking about, this is the 3rd to the 7th century. This empire is called the Sasanian Empire. That's just the name of the people running it, the dynasty that runs it. So this is the Persian Empire. And that's important for us because this is where, at this point, we have 2 different centers for the Jewish diaspora. We have one in the land of Israel, producing, for example, the Jerusalem Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud. And here in the Persian Empire, in modern day Iran and Iraq, we have the community that produces the Babylonian Talmud. And this is what the text we'll deal with today. And this is here. And if I try to zoom in a bit into it, so this is, look at this map, and I'm looking at this area right here. You can see the Persian Gulf and that area behind it, and I'm zooming into it. I am zooming into it here. So see, this is the Persian Gulf, and we have the 2 rivers leading into it, the Tigris and the Euphrates leading into the Persian Gulf. The Jews at that time live in this area, the narrow area between those 2 rivers. So this is a map done in the 1980s by a scholar named Oppenheimer, and he goes by written sources to try to locate where the Jews are at. Now, there's a very funny 2 or 3 pages in one of the tractate that deals with marriage. And the Talmud says, oh, don't marry these people from this village, they're very stingy, or marry these people. It's all full of like stereotype about which Jews live where, but this is how we know a lot of the places where Jews used to live in, right? So archaeological evidence are very scarce in this area. So this is mostly how we have this information. So this is where the Jews live, okay? And the Jews in this area, I don't know if you can pick up some of the names, Sura, Pumpadida, these are names that we know from the Talmud. This is where the Jewish yeshivot are, the rabbinic yeshivot. This is where the Talmud is being created. Now, the Talmud that's being redacted and created in this area is important for several reasons. First of all, it's big, it's large. It's redacted around the 6th or 7th century. What happens in the 7th century is that the Islamic conquest begins, right? So this whole area is being conquered by the Islamic conquest, and the whole different thing starts happening. But up until the Islamic conquest, this is around the time that I would place the redaction of the Talmud. Some people think it's a little bit earlier than that. We're talking about a redaction of basically an anthology. This is an encyclopedic book that has tradition going back to Second Temple, right? So we're talking about 1st to 6th century. So hundreds of years of Jewish tradition collected together to cover dream interpretation and astrology and astronomy and medicine and theology and law and many aspects of Jewish culture collected together in this beautiful mess of representing various Jewish tradition collected in this volume. Now, when this is being redacted, there's other volumes around, the Palestinian Talmud, for example. But by the 11th century, this becomes the most important composition for Jewish culture and gets settled as the corpus by which Jews determine what they're supposed to do. Right? By 11th century, this is just definitely the case. I would say until today, the modern state of Israel, where I live and my family live, and the recent election is very much determined by what's in this book. There is actual ramification on people's life based on this book. So this is an important corpus that's being written. And that's the corpus I study. And I look at it to try and ask, what can this text tell me about Jewish-Christian interaction? I ask, does this anthology of texts tell me something about what Jews thought, knew, interacted, believed in comparison to their Christian neighbors, right? So this is my question of research. Does this text tell me anything about Jewish-Christian interaction at that time period? And why is this important? It's important because at this point, well, Jesus comes into the fore, right? He's being crucified around the year 30. His followers, the 1st century CE, beginning of the church, beginning of the 2nd century CE. This is the time when Christianity comes into being, right? And the religion, the Roman Empire becomes Christian and beginning of the 4th century. These are the crucial time for Christianity to become and then win and become the big winner of that time. But Rabbinic Judaism developed side by side that new religion. And my question is, Do they have anything to do with one another? And can this text tell me what exactly did they have in contact with? Did they have any contact with each other? Can the Talmud tell me anything about Christianity? Now, the question I just asked was answered in research in the beginning with a definite no. Scholars used to say, no. The Talmud, our important text, developed in a vacuum. It stood on its own. Had nothing to do with Christianity. I'm going to put a parenthesis here and say this is tied in very directly with the history of scholarship. The people who used to study the Babylonian Talmud were mostly Orthodox men coming from Western Europe that looked at this as a sacred text. They were very comfortable with reaching the conclusion that the Talmud had nothing to do with Christianity. That was very easy for them to do. Same thing happening on the Christian side. Christian scholars were very comfortable saying, oh, Christianity had nothing to do with Judaism. This was also separate on its own. Guess what? Scholars of ancient Christianity were also Protestant, European, that were very comfortable reaching that conclusion. Something happens in recent years, I would say about 20 or 30 years or so, that we've begun to be open to re-asking that question. So for example, you would see scholars such as Urbach, a giant of Jewish studies in the 50s, writing, well, Christianity was only in the Roman Empire. There were no Christians in the Persian Empire, so we're excused. There's no need to look at Christians in relation to the Babylonian Talmud. Now that statement is blatantly untrue. As you can see from a map done in 2010 by a scholar named Julian, a French scholar, and she just mapped Christian site in that same area. Well, just to show you where we are, right? So we see this is the Persian Gulf and the two rivers leading up to it, right? The Euphrates and the Tigris. This is the narrow area where I showed you where all the Jews live. And this signals where the Christians are. So to say that there were no Christians in this area, not accurate, to put it mildly, right? So having known that, and again, this is not a coincidence that this map was done in 2010. Again, the study of Eastern Christianity was also sorely neglected for many reasons. Having said all that, my project basically tried to say, no. We're going to do things differently. We're going to look at the text, see what it has to suggest us, and then learn about the people, and not the other way around. We're not going to make assumption about the text and then go into the text, but we'll do it the other way around. I'm going to show you something now that I'm very proud of, because this is the first time that it's ever been done. I'm not a cartographer, and I don't do maps at all. But what I tried to do for this presentation is actually put those two maps one on top of the other and see if Jews and Christians live side by side. Now, this sounds obvious, right? That's something that you're supposed to know, to ask if Jews and Christians. No one has ever done this, and really, I should not be the first one to do it because I don't understand anything about maps. I just asked my graphic designer to do it, and believe me, it was such a hassle to do it, and no one should ever trust my map. But for the purpose of this presentation, I just want to show you what happens if I do that, if I collect those two maps and put them side by side. Again, look at the Persian Gulf, the two rivers, right? The Tigris and the Euphrates leading into it. You with me on this? Okay. The narrow area, remember? And now let's do this. So I'm putting Julian's map. This is blue, all the Christians. And then I'm putting on top of it the Jewish areas. Look, and this is, I want to specifically turn your attention to this area. There's a city, a Christian city called Seleucid Ctesiphon, and it was the capital of the Christian empire in this area, on the Christian site. This is where all the centers, the leaders of the church lived. And this is just across the river from Mechoza, which is like the Jewish center of the city. Right in, side by side, the Jewish areas. Having said that, so please take a moment to be impressed with this map, because I am. But in any case, again, do not trust it, but at least just to show that we as scholars, when we look at the question, does the Babylonian Talmud have anything to tell us about Jewish-Christian relation and how those two religious communities operated side by side, came in contact, became what they are side by side? What should be our default assumption? Did they have contact and did they not? I propose to you, just looking at the map, that we should change our paradigm and look at it the other way around, right? Two communities living side by side. We should at least check if they had anything to do with each other. You can guess from my tone, after 12 years of doing this, that my conclusion is yes, very much so. But this is new, right? This is new. This is kind of like a really exciting time. I always say I feel like a discoverer of new lands, right? Looking and checking text for this kind of thing. Okay, so this is the background to what I'm doing. So I want to move from the text to the people. I want to say, if I find in the Babylonian Talmud evidence of knowledge of Christian tradition, so if the Talmud say something about Christianity, knows something about Jesus, knows something about, for me, it tells me something. I'm a historian. I care about history. It tells me that someone in the rabbinic milieu knew enough about Christianity to create that tradition. That's new. That's an historical fact, right? So this is something that I can now say. Someone in the rabbinic community knew enough about Christianity to create that tradition, number one. But more than that, someone understood what he was saying, right? How do I know that? It's not just the one person, because someone made the decision to put it in the Babylonian Talmud for us to sit in 2023 in Temple Emmanuel and read this, because this was kept for 2,000 years or 1,500 years, whenever this was created, and put this in and preserve it. So that's another historical fact. So someone understood enough about Christianity to get it, what they were trying to say. Don't forget, I'm interested in the people, not just the text, right? So I want to ask how many people knew, what they interacted with, and how it influenced both religious communities, the fact that they were in touch. So this is why the text is important. Are we clear so far? Okay. So when we're looking at Christianity in the Talmud, there's a few obvious avenues, and we'll do some in the next, today and the next two lectures. I'm just giving you kind of what happened? There we go. A little bit of a peek of what we'll do in the next classes to tempt you to come again. We're going to talk about stories about Jesus in the Talmud, right? What did the Talmud have to say about Jesus? And it does have interesting to say about Jesus. So Jesus is indefinitely in the Talmud, and it's there. And the Talmud doesn't have nice things to say about Jesus. And we'll talk about this, and we'll do a whole section about this. But if we're just looking at Jesus in the Talmud, right? So I asked you, what does the Talmud have to say about Christianity? And we jumped to Jesus. That's the first thing we were looking for. And it's not very nice. We'll do the not nice part, and we'll do the Jesus part in another lecture dedicated to that. But today I want to start off in a different direction. And I want to say, looking for Jesus in the Talmud, looking for the word Jesus, is a little bit like, you know, the joke about the guy looking under a lamp, street lamp, and he's looking on the ground, and someone asks him, what are you looking for? And he's saying, I lost a coin. And they're like, did you lose it here? Let me help you. And he's like, no, I lost it there. And like, so why are you looking here? He said, no, because here is where the lamp is, right? So this is what, and so I use the story or this joke to say, sometimes the research question will lead to certain answers, right? The fact that he's looking under a lamp will lead to the fact that he will not find his coin, right? He's looking for a specific. Looking for Jesus in the Talmud, which we'll dedicate a class to that, will lead for very specific definition of Jewish-Christian interaction, because when Jews talks about, or rabbis talks about Jesus, they said certain things. But are we making the right choice by just looking for the word Jesus? Think about it for a second. In your life, if you consider yourself or define yourself as Jewish, how often do you really think about the theological concept of your life and the definition of God, and how much of a religious person's life, and not just Jewish or Christian, is spent talking about things like charity or repentance, or talking, how do you talk to your friend, and respecting your parents, and questions such as these, or helping the poor. And all these questions that go under the umbrella of spiritual life or religious life or theological life is not uniquely Jewish, right? If I look at those topics and then compare what Christians and Jews have to say about that, will I find something else? That's my question for today. And this is what I want to try and explore with you guys. So this is based on my first book. Today's lecture is based on an example from my first book. And my first book, I just want to spend a second talking about my artwork. So I write this book, which is based on my dissertation that I studied here with Yale. I have to tell you a little bit about myself. So I live in Jerusalem, and I have 3 kids and a husband and twin boys who are 13, and Yahav was 8. And I had my education at Hebrew University. I studied philology and historical philology in the Talmud department. And then I came to Yale and I studied Christianity here. And it's no coincidence that I was sitting in the first, semester at Yale and studying Christianity from morning to evening and studying with the best scholars that Yale has to offer. And one of my professors was a scholar of monks. And I sat and read for a very long time a lot of the literature of the monks. And I was very surprised to see what I'll show you today. And I tried to find I found a lot of allusion to that literature, and this is what we'll show. But then I wrote a book on dissertation, and I wrote a book about monks and rabbis talking to each other. And I'm like, what am I going to put on the cover of the book? So I have a friend called Sarah Offenheimer. She's an art historian, and she gave me a picture from this. This is taken from a French Bible made for the King of France in 2000, in the 13th century. This is called Bible Morales. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous Bible. It's big. This is just like a corner of one of the pages, and there's like many pages, and they're beautifully illustrated. But that corner, this is taken from medieval time. It's really anachronistic to use it, but it was so perfect that I could not use it. You can see here a dialogue happening, right? And who's talking to who? So you can, I don't know, you tell me, what do we see? We see here 2 groups talking to each other, right? Can you identify one of the groups? Help me out. Speak up. Monks. Okay, good. Monks on the right and on the left, Jews. Good. How do you know these are monks? Let's start with that. The hairstyle. You can also see their garment that's very long, as you can see, as opposed to the other, right? Their garments are like very, very long, and the hair. I don't know if you've seen the movie Name of the Rose with it was an old movie about Umberto Eco's book, right? So this is how they looked in medieval time. And on the other side, you see Jews. How do you know they're Jews? That's true. That's a very good answer. As someone who has to hold myself in place, not to use my hands, I completely agree. But more than that, there's a very telling sign. Look at that. Look at the first guy in the front. Yes, he has a hat on his head, right? This was a sign of a Jewish garb. They covered their hair. They had like a triangle hat thingy. And also look at obviously the shorter garbs, right? The robes that they're wearing are shorter. You can really see that. And this is actually a scene depicting a period in time where Jews were obligated by law to hear talks and sermons by Christian monks. They had to do it in medieval time. There was a period where they had to do that. So you can see the book in the middle. They're learning or being forced to learn from Christian monks about Christian tradition. But what I love about this scene, and this is why obviously these are rabbis and monks talking, or rabbis or Jews. I love how the Christian depiction of it describe the Jews as being very agitated, right? They're arguing over scripture. Obviously, the monks are very calm. The Jews are less so. But look at the guy in the front, right? There's a sense of turning away, but the body is towards the text. There's a sense of conflicting notions, right? Or is he in? Is he out? What does he feel about what's happening, right? And that's exactly the type of sensation I want to get you into in my talk today. So if I have to say something about my research, my conclusion is that it's complicated. And interreligious dialogue and interreligious community dialogue is a complicated matter. It's not easily defined as polemic versus, a simulation. Never works this way. It's always complicated. And this is what the text is describing. And this is why I loved choosing this for my book. Okay, ready to go? Let's do some text. And before we do some text, let's talk a little bit about monks. So where does monks come from? Where does monasticism come from? So when we're talking about monks, we're talking about the first Christian monks, the monasticism phenomena Starts happening in the 3rd century CE. Around the area, you can see here this is Egypt, right? This is the Sinai, and this is Egypt. This is the river, the Nile, and this is the delta, what we call, right, the area where the most fruitful, Egypt is a desert, but around the Nile and especially the delta area, this is where people live around this area, and until today, this is where most of the inhabitants of Egypt live. And we know that the community starts there, and they spread to the land of Israel very fast also, but they started in the 3rd century in Egypt and Palestine and Syria, and this is the area. And it starts off by those individual men going off and living in caves on their own and believed to have been holy men. The thing is that this becomes super popular, super fast. They are the rock stars of the ancient world. They're the celebrities. Everyone wants to know holy men, and there's stories about them, and people go and visit them. There's pilgrimage to see them, right? They want to isolate themselves and be on their own and meditate. And as soon as they start, everyone starts visiting them and seeing them isolating and meditating, and they record what they have to say and they write it down. So they go into caves on their own or in small groups, and they eat very little, sleep very little. They believe to have powers to perform miracles, bring rain in this desert area, to talk to animals, I don't know if you've seen Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie. Remember when he goes out to the desert and he steps on the foot of a guy sitting in a cave? Do you remember that scene? Go look for it again. This is it. These are the holy men. They're so prominent that this is like the mark of what Peter Brown called late antiquity, the end of the ancient time and the beginning of medieval time. The holy man phenomena, right? This is all over the place. Everyone reads what they have. We have manuscript in all languages: Coptic, Syriac, Aramaic, Greek. Everyone's talking about them and what they do and how they do it. And this is important, right? Because this is all over the place. Everyone's talking about, you see them, you visit them. This is what they're doing. Just a little bit of pictures just to show you that this reaches also the land of Israel very fast, 5th century. This is Wadi Kilt. I don't know if or Emek Kidron. This is just next to, on the way to the Dead Sea. It's on the left. You can, I don't know, Kfar Adumim, if you know some of this area. So you can see this started off with caves on the side of the valley, and then the monastery kind of like was built around those caves, right? So you can actually, it's very dramatic. You can see this like on the side of the mountain. The monasteries, these are very ancient monasteries going back to the 5th century, 6th century. Some of them, women are not allowed to visit, so I only saw it from outside, never saw it from inside. But this is some of the monasteries of that area. Again, I point you towards this movie by Sean Connery when he was young and nice, and the Name of the Rose. It really depicts a life in a monastery in medieval time, and it's very close to how they live until today. Okay, ready? This is the background we need in order to go back and read the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so we don't start with the Babylonian Talmud, we start with Palestinian Talmud. And this is a story, a tradition that's found in the Palestinian Talmud. And the Palestinian Talmud is a text that was redacted much earlier than the Babylonian Talmud. This is around the 4th or maybe beginning of the 5th century, not in Jerusalem. It's called the Jerusalem Talmud, but the one place we know that it wasn't redacted is Jerusalem, because Jews are not allowed in Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So somewhere in the Galilee, this is a story that's found only there. And the story goes like this. For 13 years, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, or in shorthand Rashbi, lived hidden in a cave of cherubs of Terumah. Terumah is a word for priest offering, and he lives in a cave for 13 years. And he stayed there until his body became afflicted with a skin disease that looked like rust spots. It literally means until his skin became rusty, which I really love that description. That's it. And then he comes out and he does a couple of things, and we'll stop the story here. But that's the part of the story I want to focus in. Now, let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He is a scholar, a rabbinic scholar, a rabbi that lived around the Bar Kokhba revolt. So we're talking about beginning the first half of the 2nd century. So Bar Kokhba revolt was around the year 132, right, CE. So we're talking around the same time period. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived then in the land of Israel. Now remember, this is found in a much later text, without in the 4th and 5th century, and it's not in the earlier rabbinic sources. And we have that tradition about him staying in a cave for 13 years. Why? We don't know. We just say that he was hiding from something, from someone. Why would he hide? Let's think about it for a second. The most obvious answer could be that he was hiding because of the Romans, right? If he lives in the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, that might be it. Now, interestingly enough, right? That's what I wanted to show you. We do have evidence from the Bar Kokhba revolt of a very extensive, and we have new findings every year now, which is kind of cool, that the Bar Kokhba revolt was actually very planned in advance, and they invested a lot of time before they started the revolt, and by building mostly their main, war strategy was to hide in caves. So they would build very elaborate, you can see here, a very elaborate, sets of caves to hide it from the Romans. Actually, some of them you can actually go visit, and I let my kids run around. It's very fun to go back and forth in those caves, and it's very tiring, as you can see. One memorable eve of Passover, I had the brightest decision to do this in the morning of the Passover Seder, so the kids will be very tired, and then they'll nap before the Passover Seder. Obviously, they were very tired and never napped, and then the Seder was a complete disaster. But in any case, they had a great time running around in those caves. It's just next to my house. It's very close to where I live in Jerusalem. But so this is we have a few of those, right? So we can think of a historical kernel to the story that remembers Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai hiding in a cave for historical reasons for the Bar Kokhba revolt. But it's not mentioned, obviously, in the story. And that's all the information we get. That's actually very typical of the Palestinian Talmud. It's very shorthand. It's very enigmatic and kind of like a short. But then we get to the Babylonian Talmud. That's my text. And in the Babylonian Talmud, which is later, this story gets extended much, much more. Is that good? What's happening?
No, there's something.
What happened? Oh, good?
Something was just blocking the way. So you're good.
Okay. So we get to the Babylonian Talmud, and that story gets extended. And this is actually also typical of the Babylonian Talmud, taking a very short tradition and extending it and elaborating and whatever. And the Talmud doesn't like enigmatic story. So why was he in a cave? You see the 3 dots in the beginning of the story. There's an extended introduction to the story, why he goes into the cave, what's the reason. He says bad things about the Roman chase after him. He goes first and hide in a study house, and then his wife gives him sandwiches, and then at some point he's like, oh, I can't trust my wife, I'll just go into a cave. And he goes with his son, and this is where we join the story. And this is where we join the story in the Talmud, and look at that. So they, meaning him and his son, they're like, we can't trust this woman not to tell on us. She's bringing us sandwiches, which is really nice, but still, we can't trust her. And they go, just thinking of this wife that goes in the next day and bring them sandwiches and don't find them in their first hiding place. And she never finds out what happens to them. Fun stuff. But in any case, we're focusing on the rabbi and his son, and they're going into a cave. And this is where we join the story, right? The parallels to the Talmud. But look at what the Talmud does with the story. They went and hid in a cave. A miracle occurred, and a carob tree and water well were created for them. They would strip their garments and sit up to their necks in sand. The whole day they studied. When it was time for prayers, they robed, covered themselves, prayed, and then put off their garments again so that they should not wear out. What does the Talmud do here? It takes the statement of saying they stayed in the cave for 13 years, and what does it explain? It explains 2 things. Help me out. What does the Talmud do here? It adds, what did they eat, right? So the Talmud says they had to eat something, 13 years, right? So the Talmud says they had a miraculous tree appears with carobs. You know what carob are? I know Americans don't know. It's a very common tree in Israel. So I'll explain in a second. They had a miraculous carob tree, and they had a well of water. Now carobs are very hard. They look like a half moon thing. They're very hard black things, and You can make a pretend chocolate spread that parents tell their children that you can eat instead of chocolate. It's not even close, remotely close, but in any case, and it's very healthy, and it's all over Israel, and very nutritious, by the way. So someone actually checked, can you live off only carobs and water? And apparently you can't, but whoever wrote the story didn't know it, so don't try it at home. But in case it's extremely nutritious, right? So they do that, so they live off carobs and water, so they were good. And the second thing that it tells us is that they would take off their clothes and sit in sand, right, covered in sand until their head is only showing. And then only when prayer time came, 3 times a day, they would get out of the sand, dress, pray, then take them off again. I'm guessing 2 men that didn't fold it very nicely on the side, but maybe. And then they back into the sand, right? Now imagine the picture. This is what I know, the Radiohead, like the talking head kind of a thing, right? It's just the heads on the sand. What better depiction of a complete dedication to study, right? There's no body anymore. It's just the head studying. It's an incredible depiction of what they do, right? It's just the spiritual. It's just the head saying. Also, can you imagine how their skin looked after, this time in the sand like this? Okay, but this is what it is. But again, why do we need this information? What is the Talmud explaining by saying that? Think about it, the 13 years in a cave. What do we need explanation for? Exactly. And remember they, chucked the wife, so no one can sew their socks or whatever. So how will they have clothes, right? So this explains it. They covered themselves in sand and they only used the clothes when they had to, right? So this explains it. So the Talmud doesn't like this unexplained stuff. So that's how it's explained. Let's continue. So they dwelt 12 years in the cave. Remember how long did they stay in the cave in the Palestinian Talmud tradition? Who remembers? 13. This time it's 12. That's interesting, right? And then it said, Elijah came and stood at the entrance of the cave and exclaimed, he's standing outside and said, who will inform the son of Yochai that the emperor is dead and his decree annulled? All of a sudden we know, right, the Romans, the dead, you can come out. Right? He's standing outside, he's not getting in, he's yelling this, but they get the message and they come out. And they see a man plowing and sowing. They go out into the world after 12 years in the cave, and they see someone working the land. And they exclaimed, they forsake life eternal and engage in life temporal. These people have the choice of learning or working, and they choose to work. Whatever they cast their eyes upon was immediately burned up. Forgot to mention, rabbis have this magical power. If they're very, very upset, to burn with their eyes. It's kind of like cyclope or something like a third eye. They can burn with their eyes when they're very, very upset. I'm just saying, be careful of Michael. I'm just saying, this is something you get in rabbinical school. So you get very, very upset and you can burn with your eyes when you're very upset. And they're very upset of people who have the choice of learning and choose to work. But then upon a heavenly voice comes along and cries out, have you emerged to destroy my world? Return to your cave. This is not okay. Go back to your cave. And so they return and dwell there for 12 months. So what do we get here? The addition of 1 year, right? They get 1 more year. But notice the cave is no longer a hiding place from the Roman. What does the cave become? A prison or a punishment or a way to educate them, right? About the need of regular people, right? And the punishment of the wicked and Gehenna is limited to 12 months. This is a saying in the Mishnah, which is, by the way, super interesting, right? There's a limit how much time you spend in hell, or just 12 months. And then a heavenly voice came after 12 months and said, you can come out. And then they come out and the story continues. And I want to stop here. Interesting. Not only is it interesting, that story actually becomes super crucial and important. Why? This figure of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai becomes the hero of a very important later medieval composition called the Zohar, which is the basis of the Kabbalah movement. So this figure starts, getting a whole book of its own, talking about the travels and the meditation and the experience, the spiritual experiences that he had. But that's the myth story that's the basis of the Zohar. Now, if you might have heard that Madonna a few years ago had a revelation. She discovered the Zohar, and Zohar became the Kabbalah became this huge thing that all of Hollywood became very obsessed with. This is it. We just read the story. This becomes a super, super important. The cave in which he was hiding is a pilgrimage site in Israel. I don't know if you heard a few years back, there was a huge disaster that something caved in and many people died. That's his burial place of this Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But this is a pilgrimage site where more than 1 million people visit a year. So he is a big deal. This story is a big deal. What I want to talk a little bit about is what the Talmud does. The Talmud takes the Palestinian story and enlarge it and extends it. So far, so good. We all read it. What I want to do is take what we saw in the story and move it, if I ever get to do this, Aramaic and Hebrew combined. Michael, since you touched this, I can no longer switch sides.
This magic ability.
There we go. Okay. Let me read you some monastic stories of the time. Remember when we had this whole introduction when I was a little bit, tiring you with the introduction about monks? Now I want to read some monastic stories. So stories about monks. Let's read a little bit and then talk. So this is a story about Jerome. This is a church father who is very fascinated by those holy men. And he's very excited about this. And he wants to know who was the first one. And he reaches a conclusion. The first monk was this guy named Paulus or Paul. And he tells us the story. And he says, during the persecution of Decius and Valerian, when Cornelius at Rome and Cyprus and Carthage shed their blood in blessed martyrdom, many churches in Egypt and the Tibet were laid waste by the fury of the storm. So Romans are persecuting early Christians, and they're really going after Christian communities. And while such enormities were being perpetrated in the lower part of Tibet, Paul and his newly married sisters were bereaved of both their parents, he being about 16 years of age. So this guy, Paul. His brother-in-law conceived the thought of betraying the youth whom he was bound to conceal. So he has to run. So the young man had the tact to understand it, and confirming his will, necessity fled to the mountain to wait for the end of the persecution against the Christian. He began with easy stages and repeated with halts to advance to the desert. At length, he found a rocky mountain, at the foot of which, closed by a stone, was a cave of no great size, and he removed the stone. And I'll look at the comment by Jerome. So eager are men to learn what is hidden, right? So I don't know if you lived in Israel or in the desert, you never move rocks because, you never know what's behind it. So Jerome is like, why would he do that? But he did anyway, because he's very curious. And he moves the stone, he goes, he goes to the mountains, he run away from the question. And what has he found? He made eager search and saw within a large hall open to the sky shaded by a widespread branches of an ancient palm. The tree, however, did not conceal a fountain of transparent clearness. The water, as thereof no sooner gushed forth from the stream, was swallowed up in a small opening at the ground, which gave it birth. So he finds a cave with a miraculous tree, palm tree this time, with dates, and water. Accordingly, regarding his abode as a gift from God, he fell in love with it, and there in prayer and solitude spent all the rest of his life, the palm affording him food and clothing. Let's look at the story. So this is one story, many stories about the first monks, where we see that when the monks go and discover, they run from Romans, they have many reasons to go, mostly persecution from Romans, but then they find dwellings in caves with miraculous trees and miraculous water. They care about hiding what needs to be hiding with their clothing, so they use it with palm trees or do some other mechanism to remain modest. But the cave becomes no longer a hiding place, but a place of solitude and prayer and meditation, right? The cave becomes its own thing. Are you getting where I'm getting with this? Let's read another story. This is the story of Paphnutius, and he tells us about Father Abba Anthony. Abba is the Aramaic word for an elder person, right? Also in Hebrew. But look what the story says. Now, I was glad to flee from my sin from this woman, said Timothy. He didn't do anything. He was just thinking thoughts, but whatever. That was his sin. And he rose, and he's very scared of that. And he goes into the mountain and arose and came to the desert. And I renounced everything between myself and that woman. And I found, look what he found, a spring of water in this cave and the date palm tree. Sound familiar? And my life was fixed like this. The palm tree produces 12 bunches of date each year, one each month, And this bunch from a single palm tree lasts me for 30 days at a time. And after 30 days, another bunch grows in its place. I don't know if you ever had dates. It's extremely nutrition, but I would not recommend a diet based only on dates. But in any case, again, he didn't know it, but I have no bread for food and my hair has continued to grow and my clothes are completely worn out. And now I clothe with the hair of my head that should be respectfully covered. Again, another solution to the clothes being worn out. This time it's hair growing out. Again, I point you to Monty Python, my reference book for this class. So again, he's completely naked, but his hair is covered, covering his body parts. And but look again, a cave, right? He's running away. There's a cave. There's a water. There's a tree that gives him everything he needs, and something to cover his body, right? So, what am I going with? What I'm trying to say is, what the Babylonian Talmud does is what I've been doing here in class. He takes a tradition about a rabbi in a cave and try to elaborate and explain what the rabbi is doing and how he's doing. He's doing that by using literary tropes that are extremely popular of the time of the holy man, of the Christian holy man. And he's using that to explain what the rabbis is doing. Now, I want to stop here for a second and talk about historiacus. Again, this is a story about a rabbi long dead, 2nd century in the land of Israel, not the same geographical area, long time ago during the Bar Kokhba revolt, not a historical figures. Rabbis don't go into caves. This is a Christian thing. This is what monastic Christians are doing. Rabbis don't do that. But when they're telling a story about a holy man sitting in a cave, they tell it in a way that works with the literature of the time, the very, very popular rock star celebrity of the time. And they're making Rashbi into one of those by telling the story that way. When I said I did something a little bit similar with you guys, is that when I try to explain monastic literature, I use 2 popular examples from Monty Python, right? A British from the 70s. And I used as the second one, Sean Connery, right? The name of the rose, right? Which is becoming very depressing because both of them are not known to my younger students, which is I found extremely sad. I actually make them as part of the syllabus to watch Monty Python. But in any case, these are 2 examples from cultural, milestones in our culture, but modern culture, to explain something about the past, right? This is exactly the same thing. Someone is describing, notice, the word Christianity doesn't appear anywhere in the Talmud, not in the Babylonian Talmud. The word Jesus doesn't appear there. Nothing about Christian. It's so not there that he becomes the hero of the Zohar and his pilgrimage site, and no one knows anything that has to do with anything Christian at the time, which is kind of nice, I think, because this shows how religious in context. And remember, this is what we're here to check in this talk and the few other talks that I'll give. How does communities come in contact, right? This is not clear. I'm not looking under the spotlight to look for Christians. I'm not looking for Jesus. I'm looking for communities in conversation. And this is what communities in conversation do. They take literary tropes and they incorporate them and they tell the story better using the tools that they have of their time. So far, so good. But don't forget, we're also historians here. Whoever tells that story knows enough about Christian that he knows that these are literary tropes to use. To make the story this gives me a historical fact. Someone here knew enough about monastic literature to create that story, right? Don't forget, that's new. We didn't know that. My book was the first to suggest that the rabbis had knowledge of monastic Christian community. That's new and kind of exciting, right? This is the first time we're learning that Jews knew about monastic communities. Ready for some more examples? A little bit more? Michael, we can do some more? Okay. Remember when they come out of the cave and they see the people working the land and they're like, well, how are you forsaking eternal life and going to pro-life? Let's read another monastic passage. So this is from a text that's called the Sayings of the Desert Fathers, or the Apostigmata Patrum, I don't know if you know the Pirkei Avot, the Sayings of the Father. We actually have a parallel with the same phrasing. This was a thing in the ancient time to collect sayings of fathers, so it's a similar trope. And look at what it says. This is a story about the father Silvanus, and that's the story. A brother went to see Abba Silvanus on the mountain of Sinai. So we're talking about the Mount of Sinai until today has a very famous monastery that was there from very, very early on, 4th century, 5th century, and it's still there. And we were told that a brother, so those monks, the holy men, they go and visit each other. As I told you, they go from one place to another. And this guy comes to Father Silvanus, Abba Silvanus, on Mount Sinai to visit him. He comes there and he saw the brothers working hard. Those monasteries were a little bit, again, as you can see in the name of the rose, they were a little bit of like a kibbutz, right? They were like a little bit of their own universe. They grow their own food. They copy manuscript. They raise wine. They do wine. Wine production was very big in monastic communities. They get donations from people from outside. This was like a small thing, but they work the land and they grow vegetables and they have cows and so they grow their own food. And he sees them working the land. So this visitor turned to Silvanus and he says, "Oh, do not labor for the food which perish, but that meat which endures unto everlasting life." This is a quote from John. And he's like, how are they forsaking everlasting life? The study, the meditation, the spirituality, to work the land? They're actually dedicating their life and they're working the land using the exact same two parallels, like everlasting life and temporal life. And he's quoting John. So the old man sent to his disciple. So he hears this and he turns and he says, Zechariah, give the brother a book and putting him in a cell or small, without anything else. Okay, so he says that and they give him a book and he goes and so when the ninth hour came, the visitor watched the door expecting someone would send to call him for the meal, right? He's hungry, he's getting his belly is rumbling, right? He's hungry because he's been studying alone. When no one called, he get up and he went to the old man to sit down and said to him, have the brothers not eaten today? And the old man says, they did. And he said, why did you not call me? And the old man said to him, oh, you're a spiritual man, right? You're everlasting life. You do not need temporal food. So we didn't call you. You're like, criticizing us for working the land. We, being carnal, want to eat. So this is why we work. We work the land because we actually want to eat. So obviously, you have chosen the good portion and read the whole day, and you do not need to eat carnal food, he says. And then he understands his mistake, and he says sorry, and he learned his mistake. By the way, this is extremely, and I don't have time to go into that, but look how interesting that is, right? We have the complexity of ora and labora, work and study, this tension always in every spiritual community. How much you dedicate to coming and hearing a scholar from Ben Gurion University teaching you and how much time you spend on your work, right? This is always the tension of how much time you spend on studying versus, obviously you should always come to my lectures, but I'm saying this tension, right? Between the two, how much to dedicate, how much time to dedicate. And look what the father is saying. We need to do the work as well, right? This is something that, in the land, in the state of Israel, we negotiate a lot, right? How much we allow people to just study versus to work and study, right? This is something we struggle with all the time. And this is a complicated stance to make. But in any case, look at the story. A guy comes in, criticizes working people, using temporal life versus eternal life, and he gets taught a lesson. How? By being put into a cave and being punished, right? And by this learning that some people need to work the land as well. Sound familiar? This is exactly the same story you have in Rashbi's story, right? They're being sent back into a cave for criticizing exactly the same thing, right? People working the land and learning about the need to have work alongside spiritual life. Really very similar tropes. Notice I'm not saying that they're quoting this monastic story. I'm just saying these are tropes, literary tropes that are found and are very, very similar, found also in the Babylonian Talmud. I'll just do one more and then we'll stop and let you ask some questions, but just one more. It's not surprising to find Elijah, of all people, as the one telling Rashbi to get out of the cave. Elijah was actually a huge figure in monastic community. He's considered one of the first monks, right? In the Bible, he goes into the desert. He's running away from the evil queen, and he's very spiritual, and he's considered one of the first monks and is a very, very important character for the monks. I know if you visit Haifa, there's the Carmelite monastery, and Haifa is all about Elijah, going around this area, and he's considered one of the first monks before monasticism existed. But for them, he's like a figure. So finding Elijah, of all people, doing that in the story is not surprising. What's interesting is, remember in the story, he stands outside and doesn't go into the cave. Remember, I kind of like and I said, he just says like, who will tell them that they can get out of the cave, right? It doesn't go in. Actually, that's actually really, really interesting, because if you know something about monastic literature, you know that you should never, ever enter a monk's cave. Look at that, for example. Look at the story. I continued. So Paphnutius goes around and he visited all these holy men, and look what he says. I continued walking into the farther desert, and on the fourth day, I came upon a cave. He wants to go in, he wants to see it. And upon approach it, I knocked at the mouth of the cave according to the master custom, in order the brother might come out and I might greet him. All these stories again and again tell us you never, never enter someone's abode. This is a place of spiritual reckoning. This is a place of isolation. This is where you meditate. This is your own space, and you never go in. You stand outside and wait for someone to come out. Explaining that when Elijah comes into Rashbi's cave, it's no longer a hiding place from the Romans. This is a monastic abode. This is how you act. You stand outside. Elijah is one of the monks, and he stands outside and tells them from outside what's happening and doesn't go in. It really explains that part of the story that was weird for us if you didn't know how monks behave. To conclude, and I don't have time to go into more details, but believe me, there's more. What I basically try to show you today is that the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the cave is a story that the essence of it is found in the Palestinian Talmud. Someone in the Babylonian Talmud took the story and enlarged it, expanded it, they redacted it, made it much longer and nicer, and explained a lot of details. He did so by using literary tropes that were very common and popular at the time from the monastic Christian literature. It didn't change. The rabbi is very kosher, so kosher that he becomes, it's still very Jewishy. There's the word Christianity is not mentioned. Nothing here is very Christian in essence, so much so that, again, he became this hero of the Zohar and everything. But for me as a historian, two things are very, very important. The first is that when a religious community come in contact with another religious communities, it will make a difference for both communities in contact. In this case, I'm looking at the Jewish side, and I'm saying they're thinking about very similar things. They're talking about spiritual asceticism, right? Going on your own, off on your own. Criticizing others for the balance they do on work and study. What does being on your own do to you? And I kind of omitted the end of the story, but that is actually important for the rest. And they're saying, oh, wait, there's another religious community nearby that's thinking about very similar topics. This is not about Jesus. This is about something that is interesting to a religious community wherever. So we're thinking together about this. And the way we're doing this is actually using literary tropes of holy men, of Christian holy men, and making Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai into our holy man, and then thinking through him about questions such as the balance between work and study and spirituality and asceticism. We're using literary trope from the holy man literature to think about this alongside the Christian community next to us. For me, that's a really, really important conclusion to reach. We tend to think sometimes about the past as being very different from our own present. When scholars tended to look at the past, they look at Judaism or Christianity as two separate entities, and kind of imagine kinds of walls between religion and how they developed, and try to understand the religion from within itself. I don't know why would we think that. Everything in our world shows that religions that come in contact and people that come in contact influence each other. They come in dialogue with each other. They think about things together. This is something that happens, as we see, because people are people. And this is what happens. And we have to use that understanding when we look at the past as well. And this leads me to my second conclusion, which is an important one. This is really, really important for us as historians to understand the past. For the intellectual history of understanding how Rabbinic Judaism became what it is, the Babylonian Talmud, that very, very important corpus of Jewish culture, how it came to be, its intellectual history, it's really, really important for us to understand historically that it came to be by being in contact with other religious communities of the time. And it did. this is just one example, but the others examples as well, which I'll show in the next few talks as well. The Talmud betray evidence of rabbinic author knowing, being familiar with Christian tradition and using them when creating their own rabbinic corpus. That's a historical conclusion that is very, very important for us. And we didn't know that. So when Judaism and Christianity come to be, they're doing that side by side and in conversation with one another. And that's both a historical conclusion and a theologically, religiously important conclusion to reach. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll do more in the next two talks. And now, please feel free to ask questions.
Recognizing that there are lots of people who are joining us also online. So if you have any questions, I am going to give you the microphone.
So the tract from the Desert Fathers or Desert Brothers, is that incorporated in any of what we know as the four Gospels or the New Testament?
Good question. So the Gospels are much earlier. So when we're talking about the Gospels, like the Gospels talk about the life of Jesus, but they're actually composed later, or at least the ones that we have. So if Jesus was crucified, they are at years 30. The synopsis Gospels, Matthew, Luke, and Mark, reduced around the Mark maybe 70s or something, around the destruction of the temple afterwards, and then in the 80s. So the end of the first century. John is already maybe even beginning of the second century. So we're talking about a much earlier corpus. The monastic movement comes into being in the third century and fourth century. So it's later than that.
So this is independent.
This is based on, it's already, the Christian movement is very much present and very much, but this is part of that. So it shoots off of that. What's interesting is what's the connection between that movement of the holy men and the established church, right? The bishops and the priests and the church. And that's very, very interesting. So monks actually get invited to ecclesiastic meetings, and they're part of that. Sometimes it's a movement that's based on charisma, right? Someone is very spiritual. It doesn't have to be educated, but he's charismatic enough to go and have followers and people. In order to be holy, you need to be believed to be holy, right? So people need to buy into your holiness. So this is not based on education, but actually based on a different tract, which is charisma. And that conflicts with what's happening in the established church at the time. So there's tensions always between the two, and it's not always just a bad tension. Sometimes it gets to play out in harmony and conversations. That's actually a really, really interesting topic in the history of early Christianity.
At the end of one of the stories, there was a remark about Mary and Abba. And I found that really interesting. And I wondered if you could talk about that for a moment. When he said, "Forgive me, Abba," it says if he was suddenly appreciating the women who had perhaps brought him food in the past.
No, actually,
what
this
was
is
that?
the good question. So this is actually, I didn't want to go in too much into detail. This is a quote from John and a story in the Christian tradition where there's Mary, the woman, brings food. And there's an appreciation of the fact that you cannot have the spiritual world without someone bringing food, which is extremely interesting. Again, having known that in the rabbinic story, the wife that brings the sandwiches kind of gets, we don't need her because we choose to go alone into, the desert. We don't need the women to take care of the food. We have the spiritual, we have the miraculous tree, and we don't need the people working the land. But when it gets to the practice of it, again, you cannot live off a carob tree, you cannot live dates, you need the people working the land, whether it's monks or the women taking care of the food. And this is where the practical side of monasticism and also of the original story in the New Testament saying, we need that woman taking care of the holy man. So they're learning this about their time. So yes, definitely, we need that people working the land part, and women, made the food. Thank you for that question. Yes. I have a rule. Every time someone says that, and that's like seriously 100%, always the question that follows is a very good one. Every time, I know the pressure is up now. The pressure is up. But I just want to say, always when someone apologizes for the question, it's always a very good one. Let's see if it works.
I'll try to prove it wrong. In the first several stories that you told about the beginning of monastic life and the withdrawing into the caves, each one had some explanation for where food was coming from, whether it was the wife or whether it was the miraculous tree or whatever, and a source of water, and that is absolutely understandable. But the first several also talked about the care and the longevity of the clothing to cover the body, either preserving the clothes or growing your hair so that you were covered. If these are men who are withdrawing from the world, why would they bother?
Told you it's going to be a good question. Told you. It never fails. It really never fails. It's always a very good question.
Okay.
Now you're talking about their desires. So what did those people do when they're in the desert? And we have very, very extensive description of them going off to the desert in seclusion. They do all kinds of meditative practices. So for example, they would pick a verse and repeat it thousands of times repeatedly. They do manual work that are very, very boring, such as weaving baskets and repeating those sentences over and over again in an attempt to be, to shut their mind off to what? And now we have very, very elaborate description of what they're trying to shut their minds from. And that's usually fighting their inclinations. That's it. And sexual inclination is a huge one. It's a big one. So keeping modest is a huge part of it. And so we have, for example, Anthony, this is one of the first monks, and we have description of his struggles. Imagine the evil inclination depicted as women trying to tempt him, as young, beautiful, pretty boys trying to tempt him. Animals, his inclination is like a snake coming to tempt him. So and they're fighting off it, right? So they sometimes they fail and they cave, and we have description of them failing and then repenting for it. So, and we really have them like struggling where their inclination and something that's very, very strong. That's when they're on their own. What happens if they start being in smaller groups? Because, you know, being on your own, you won't survive that long in the desert. So we actually see from the beginning of, it's what's called a laura, which is a bunch of monks together, maybe in different caves, but then they meet up for prayer or to eat together, whatever. And then it becomes also, we have the structure of an actual monastery where the monks come together. This is where it gets even more complicated because it's only men, for example. So we actually see, or only women. We also have monasteries for women alongside that, but they are dedicating a lot of time of thinking about sexual desires. So for example, one thing that leads from that is that they're cut off from their families. So we have really heartbreaking stories about women who come in and say, my child went into a monastery, I haven't seen him in years. And the son refuses to come out to his mom because his mom is a temptation, right? So we see her, so women are seen as temptation, but men are a temptation as well, right? So homosexual relations is something that they really struggle with. So we have monastic rules that, for example, do not allow them to share a blanket or to sit together on a donkey, or all kinds of laws like that, that are actually, we have parallels in rabbinic literature as well. Riding a donkey is a big thing also. But so they're thinking about evil inclination all the time, what they call evil inclination, sexual inclination. So modesty is a huge thing. You're totally right. He's alone in a cave. Why would he care? They care because their sexual organs is something that is very much part of the whole mission of going into. And I thought you were going to go with your question also one step further, because also notice, and I kind of like slipped it in, the reason Rashbi goes into a cave of Bishon Baruchai is because of the Romans, but his wife is part of it, right? Because he wants to get away from his wife, whatever, he doesn't trust her for telling, but women are not to be trusted. I always like when people say, why should women not serve in the army? Because, right, they could be whatever, caught and be raped, and they will extract secrets from them, right? That was the argument. Because obviously men cannot be raped and men cannot be extracted secret, just women, right? So this is all very, so why did I go there? Oh yeah, so see, women cannot be trusted, right? Because they could be forced to reveal where they are, because obviously men know, but only women, so the women cannot be trusted. But notice some of the story about the monks. Paul, for example, goes into a cave because his sister married someone and you can't trust the sister. There's something with the sister as you can't trust her. And that the other guy, Anthony, goes because he has feelings about the woman, right? And he father. So women as something to deal with, the sentiments we have towards women. This is something. So our sexual organ is a very much big part of this holy men thing. And they deal with it at length. That's something. By the way, not just sex, food. Food is a huge deal, right? So or sleep. Sleep is a big deal. Sleep is very, very troubling because things happen when you sleep that you can't control. So they're trying to control it by not sleeping. So they stand all day long, or they brag that they haven't slept in 30 days or whatever. Food, eating very, very little food and drinking very little food. That's a big thing. So gluttony is also, so all these sexual or, gluttony and stuff, these are things that they deal with. So covering what needs to be covered is a big deal of it, even though when you're on your own, and so much more so if you're around this. Told you it's going to be a good question. Told you. It's always, it never fails. Never. So thank you for that. Good. So I'll tell you a little bit what we'll do next week. We'll do a little bit of Jesus in the Talmud, and we'll do a little bit of heretic stories. So we'll just get to bites of other Christian stuff in the Talmud and think a little bit more about religious communities and conversation. So thank you for joining me today.
So thank you so much to Paul, and thank you all, those who are here in person, those who are online. We are going to stop now. I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll end the Zoom as well. We very much look forward to continued conversation. Unfortunately, we couldn't find 3 weeks straight in a row. Hal is very widely traveling at the moment, continues to talk about her books, but using the fact that she is based in New Haven, we are splitting this up. So tonight is our first session. Next one is exactly a week from tonight on Tuesday. And then for the next one, you'll have to wait until March 1st, which is a Wednesday. But with that, thank you all so much. And now you know what questions, and I should also add that the series are once again supported by the anonymous donation from a Leave a Legacy campaign, and we are very grateful for that and so excited to be learning together. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I never used that one. Michael.